The debug and trace constants have another use besides conditionally compiling code. The System.Diagnostics.Debug and System.Diagnostics.Trace classes are enabled and disabled by the debug and trace constants. In this lesson, you'll use the System.Diagnostics.Debug class to display useful information to the developer. To begin this lesson, open the Market Trader project from your Sample Files folder. And open the code behind file of site.master. Now add the following using line to the top of the page. Using System.Diagnostics. This will make it easier to access the System.Diagnostics.Debug class. Next, remove all code from the page load event handler. And you're going to add some code to inform the developer whenever a page is loaded. Add the following code: debug.writeLine loaded page plus request.url. Because this code is in the master page, it will run whenever any page is loaded. When this code runs, it will display the URL that was requested by the user in the output window. Because you are using the debug class, this will only happen if the debug constant is enabled. Note that the trace class is identical to the debug class, but it looks for the trace constant instead of the debug constant. The two classes exist because the debug constant is only expected to be present when the project is built using the debug build profile. The debug class should be used for debugging while the site is in development, and the trace class should be used for logging diagnostic information once the site is live. Now let's test your new code. First, ensure that the Debug Build profile is selected from the Build Profiles drop-down menu. Now click Debug, Start Debugging. Now return to Visual Studio without closing your web browser and examine the output window. At the bottom of the output window, you will see your debug message. Note that you may need to use the output window's scroll bar to see the message. Now return to your web browser without stopping debugging and click the Data button on the page's navigation bar. Now return to Visual Studio without closing your web browser and examine the output window again. As expected, another line has appeared showing that marketdata.aspx was loaded. Again, you may need to scroll through the messages in the output window in order to find this message. Close your web browser now and return to Visual Studio. Now let's test your code using the Release profile. Select the Release Build profile from the Build Profiles drop-down menu and click Debug, Start Debugging. Now, once again, return to Visual Studio without closing your web browser and examine the output window. This time, there are no custom messages, The Debug class only works if the debug constant is present. Debug messages can be very useful when you want to monitor the status of your application without using breakpoints and watches. Note that by adding a listener, you can save your debug and trace messages to a file on the web server. You'll learn how to do this in Lesson 5.9. Stop debugging now and close Visual Studio. You've now completed Lesson 5.8. Use System.Diagnostics to write debug messages.